With all the problems that have plagued Hollywood since its inception, I wanted to take some time to discuss something positive for once. And what's more positive than friendship? Granted, Hollywood, like any industry that's got hundreds of billions of dollars at stake, isn't completely conducive to friendships. Add in the fame aspect of it all and all the egos, and you've got a flammable situation on your hands. Hollywood, like the movies it produces, is full of backstabbing, betrayal, and belligerence. But, also like the movies it produces, it's full of joy, happiness, and kindness. For this video, I want to take a look at the latter, and I think the best way to do so is to look at 5 friendships that have, through trials and turbulence, stood the test of time. They're not all the same. One pair met each other on one of the most successful films ever made and struck up a lifelong friendship. One pair have been friends since they were kids. One became friends and, like friends often do, split apart before, like friends often do yet again, became close yet again. One got past a language barrier, influenced each other's work, helped each other through difficult times, and have remained close. The last pair, old Hollywood icons, were friends before one betrayed the other, before again reigniting their friendship. Stick around until the end for 5 more honorable mentions who only didn't make it into the top 5 because to highlight all friendships would result in an infinitely long video. Friendships formed via a shared, difficult experience often have a knack for withstanding the test of time. That's the case for Leonardo DiCaprio and Kate Winslet, who met each other when they starred in Titanic, one of the most successful movies ever made, and probably the high watermark for romances even now. It was an arduous shoot with a ballooning budget and shooting schedule. Filming on water is always a pain, and Winslet damn near drowned while making the movie. By the time they met, DiCaprio and Winslet were rising up through Hollywood. Both had been nominated for Best Supporting Actor and Actress at a young age. DiCaprio for What's Eating Gilbert Grape, and Winslet for Sense and Sensibility. While DiCaprio was one of Cameron's first choices for Titanic, Winslet had to fight to secure the role, which she did by asking Cameron until he finally said yes. Like they say, you miss 100% of the shots you don't take. Winslet made sure that she and DiCaprio got close very quick. According to DiCaprio, the first thing she did when they met was flash him, saying, quote, "She had no shame in it. She wanted to break the ice a little beforehand, so she flashed me. I wasn't prepared for that. She had one up on me. I was pretty comfortable after that," end quote. Even with all of that though, it never got romantic behind the scenes with them, with Winslet saying, quote, "I think the reason that friendship works is because there was never any romantic thing," end quote. And if you're spending a dozen hours together a day for months on end, you're bound to form a pretty close bond with each other, which the two did. Plenty of people thought that they would get together romantically, as many co-stars have done in the past, but Winslet and DiCaprio never did. Both have taken their careers as actors very seriously, and neither have let their personal lives get to the forefront of excellent performances. Even after Titanic, when they could do whatever movie they wanted, they stuck to doing relatively smaller films instead of massive franchises or blockbusters. It wouldn't be until 2008's Revolutionary Road that the two acted opposite each other again, though they've always been there for each other off screen. Both would be seen together at award shows and would take moments to stop by the other when either of them won an award, such as when DiCaprio won a SAG award in 2016 and when Winslet won a BAFTA the same year. Perhaps the biggest tell of their closeness though is when Winslet got married to Edward Abel Smith, it was DiCaprio who gave her away at the wedding. If that ain't close, I don't know what is. The friendship between Ben Affleck and Matt Damon might be one of the longest lived and perhaps the most famous. The two have known each other since they were kids, back when Affleck was 8 and Damon was 10. They went to the same high school together and decided to pursue acting together as well, with some of their first roles being in school productions. There's a level of trust between the two that most people don't even share with their closest friends. The best evidence is that, when they were young, the two opened a joint bank account together. They had a promise between them that they would deposit earnings they got from gigs into that joint account, and either of them could tap into it to cover expenses related to getting to auditions and some daily expenses. That trust is what underlies their entire relationship. It doesn't seem too far off to say that if they would trust each other with their own money, they would also trust each other with their lives. Even as they got older, they never really grew apart. They even had their first movie cameo together in Field of Dreams. That doesn't mean that they were joined at the hip though. Damon was an excellent student and got into Harvard, while Affleck, despite getting decent SAT scores, wasn't a particularly good or attentive student and only went to college to pursue a girl. That did not work out in his favor though, so he would end up relocating to LA to pursue a career in acting. While at Harvard, Damon started writing the film that the two would become famous for, Good Will Hunting. While at Harvard, he also kept up with acting, eventually deciding to drop out when he got a role in 1993's Geronimo. The money was good enough that he made the fateful decision to leave Harvard and pursue acting full-time. He and Affleck linked back up and started working on Good Will Hunting together. They worked well as a duo, eventually landing some offers for the screenplay, though it would be a while before anything panned out. Affleck was no slouch in getting roles either. He had some fun roles in movies like Dazed and Confused, directed by Richard Linklater, a small role in School Ties, which starred Brendan Fraser and Matt Damon, and as a bully in Mallrats, directed by Kevin Smith. This Kevin Smith connection would be one of the most important that Affleck would make, and is one of the other great friendships in Hollywood. But more on that in a bit. Affleck and Smith hit it off, and Smith would end up giving Affleck his first big break in a starring role in 1997's Chasing Amy, which also featured a cameo by Damon, who would go on a cameo in several Kevin Smith films, just like Affleck. The three got along extremely well enough that Damon and Affleck asked Smith to read the screenplay that they'd been working on for Good Will Hunting. Smith loved it and took it to now disgraced producer Harvey Weinstein, who agreed to buy it and fulfill Damon and Affleck's wish to act in the film. They even asked Smith to direct it, but he passed on it, saying that they needed someone better, so they got Gus Van Sant. The movie would rocket them into the stratosphere overnight, turning them into two of the youngest Academy Award winners for any category. Affleck, in fact, is still the youngest winner for Best Original Screenplay at 25 years old. They were each in two other Oscar contenders the year after, Affleck in Shakespeare in Love and Damon in Saving Private Ryan, after which both would reunite to co-lead Kevin Smith's Dogma in 1999. Even though their careers would diverge a bit in the 2000s, they would still find ways to work together, such as with Damon doing cameos in Affleck's movies. While Damon would make his mark as Bourne in the Bourne series and Linus in the Ocean's trilogy, Affleck, after suffering a few setbacks, came back as a writer, actor, and director, three jobs that he obviously excelled at. It wouldn't be until 2021's The Last Duel that the two would reunite to write a film which they again acted in. Finally, the two did what people had been expecting for a while. They went into business together, starting Artists Equity, their production studio. The first movie, Air, was also the first time that Affleck would direct Damon in a movie. Theirs is a friendship that seems to rest on a deep level of trust between the two. There's certainly been no spat between them that spilled into the public eye. You don't just go into business with somebody that you can't get along with after all. But you don't need to have been friends since children in order to find something special. Kevin Smith and Ben Affleck's friendship goes back to their first movie together, Mallrats. Before playing a bully in Mallrats, his prior film role was as a bully in Dazed and Confused, one of Richard Linklater's best movies. Affleck and Smith struck up a friendship while working on the movie and would, for several years, be close friends. Not as close as Affleck and Damon, but close enough. Affleck credits Smith with giving him his first big break in the industry. Up until that point, he had only played bullies or done extra work and wasn't a leading man. Smith would write him as the leading man in 1997's Chasing Amy, one of Smith's best films, where Affleck plays a comic book artist that falls in love with a lesbian. The film was a critical and financial success and was the start of a successful leading man run for Affleck. Even after Good Will Hunting, Shakespeare in Love, and Saving Private Ryan helped turn Affleck and Damon into stars, it's not like they forgot their friends. They immediately came back to do Dogma with Kevin Smith, playing two of their funniest roles ever, and doing a cameo in Jane Silent Bob Strike Back along with Gus Van Sant. When Smith moved to LA, Affleck rented out his place to him before selling it to Smith. In 2003, Affleck and Smith also appeared in Dinner for Five, a filmmakers roundtable style show that was started by Jon Favreau. You can get a good idea of the rapport during the interview, which also includes Jennifer Garner, Jon Favreau, and Colin Farrell, though Affleck and Smith are the show stealers. In 2004, Smith directed Affleck in Jersey Girl. This came at a bad time for Affleck and was one of the last movies that he did before taking a break for a couple of years. His star had risen pretty quickly, but just as much as Hollywood likes a good come-up story, they also love a good downfall. Affleck would take a couple of years off of Hollywood before coming back as a triple threat, someone that acts, writes, and directs his own movies. Even a failing movie didn't come between them though. Affleck was still game for a cameo in Clerks 2 in 2006. Maybe it was a girl. Not that they were both after the same girl. No, apparently Jennifer Garner, who Affleck was with at that point, didn't much like Kevin Smith. It's doubtful that she hated him out and out, but for whatever reason, Smith and Affleck drifted apart. Later, Smith would blame it on himself. When someone on Twitter asked him what happened between him and Ben, Smith said, quote, "If I had to guess, it's because one of us has a big mouth and told too many candid stories that sometimes weren't his to tell, and the other one is Ben," end quote. Smith, who's certainly far more public than Affleck and wears his heart on his sleeve, seemed more broken up about them growing apart. Some far less reliable articles have tried to position this as a feud. That just seems disingenuous. For it to be a feud, it would require both sides to seriously try to diss the other. Affleck never really commented on it, while Smith brought it up a few times, but his tone makes it sound like a joke. More than likely, it was just two friends whose paths diverged at one point, which happens a lot. I'm sure all of us have friends that we used to be close with, but then, for whatever reason, we started talking to them less and less until it stopped altogether. But there's no animosity there, and I'm happy to be able to say that, even after nearly a decade of not talking to some people that I used to know, all it took was one DM for us to rekindle that friendship as though barely any time had passed. And that's all it took for Affleck and Smith to rekindle theirs. During an interview for Affleck's Netflix movie, Triple Frontier, Kevin McCarthy, an interviewer that covers film, asked Affleck a throwaway question.
Congratulations to you guys. Are you not doing anything with the Jay and Silent Bob reboot, are you?
Not that I know of. I haven't called me yet.
Good Will Hunting 3 hunting season. I want to do that.
That was all it took. At this point, Smith was working on Jay and Silent Bob reboot, and producer Jordan Monsanto pressured Smith into contacting Affleck. Smith did so, saying,
"Like, we're having a great time, and like, I miss you." And I said, like, I'm gonna quote King Osric from Conan the Barbarian. I said, "There comes a time when the jewels cease to sparkle and the gold loses its luster and the palace becomes like a prison, and all an old director really wants to do is make pretend with his old friend."
And that's all it took. One innocent question led to the chain reaction of a rekindled friendship. Kevin Smith got his friend back in a big bad way. Affleck would give a speech when Kevin Smith and Jason Mewes imprinted their handprints and footprints at the TCL Chinese Theater, and both were in attendance for Ben Affleck's wedding to Jennifer Lopez in 2022. Affleck also had a cameo in Clerks 3. There are a few things better than seeing two one-time friends get back together. James Cameron and Guillermo del Toro, at first glance, seem extremely different. Del Toro is, by all accounts, a decent stand-up guy who's fun to work with. James Cameron, on the other hand, has a reputation for being something of a hard-ass. While Del Toro had done a couple blockbusters, he seems to prefer smaller, independent movies with interesting creatures. Cameron, meanwhile, broke the record for the most expensive movie twice and most successful movie twice as well. But both share a passion for filmmaking, are exacting when it comes to their work, and came up through the industry starting on the technical side, so it does make sense that they became friends. The two met at a 4th of July party hosted by Ron Perlman in the early 90s. Cameron was riding high on the critical and commercial success of movies like Aliens, The Abyss, and Terminator 2, each landmark films in their own way. Del Toro, meanwhile, had directed a couple of independent movies in Mexico and was working on a third, Cronos. Both T2 and Cronos were some of the most expensive movies produced in their respective countries, and according to Rebecca Keegan's The Futurist, a biography of Cameron, he introduced himself to Del Toro by saying, quote, "I hear you and I made the most expensive movies in our respective countries. When can I see yours?" End quote. The answer would be in a few months, when Del Toro premiered it at the Charlie Chaplin Theater in Hollywood. Cameron loved it, and he and Del Toro hit it off. The movie still needed some work, such as subtitling, so when Del Toro was in Southern California, he would often stay with Cameron at his Malibu home. They dined together, watched movies together, and helped each other with their work, critiquing it as necessary. It was Del Toro that would get Cameron into reading manga and watching anime, something that would pay off on the big screen when Cameron got to work on an Alita Battle Angel movie. When Cameron was working on True Lies and Titanic, Del Toro would help by reading the script and helping Cameron avoid getting screwed when they were building the Titanic studio in Baja California. In the late 90s, Del Toro had a harrowing time. One, he was working on Mimic for Harvey and Bob Weinstein, which was a terrible experience. They would bully, berate, and even try to get Del Toro fired from the movie until actress Mira Sorvino stepped in and refused to continue filming until she was sure that Del Toro could continue to direct. Around this time, Del Toro's father, Federico Del Toro, was also kidnapped and held for ransom for 72 days. Cameron started helping almost immediately. Of the situation, Del Toro said, quote, and he came in and he took charge. He said the hostage negotiator will be in your house in 72 hours to help you through the process. He did it on his own, and we didn't ask, he volunteered. And he did offer. He said, I'll pay for the ransom. He did offer. He's that kind of guy. He is incredibly loyal, incredibly strong, end quote. You would think that that would be the worst experience, but according to Del Toro, working with the Weinsteins might have actually been worse. This is how he put it, quote, I really hated the experience. My first American experience was almost my last because it was with the Weinsteins and Miramax. I have got to tell you, 2 horrible things happened in the late 90s. My father was kidnapped and I worked with the Weinsteins. I know which one was worse. The kidnapping made more sense. I knew what they wanted, end quote. Del Toro and Cameron have sustained their friendship for well over 30 years now and are still supportive of each other, singing the other's praises and helping out where possible, such as with Del Toro appearing for a documentary Cameron did on the sci-fi genre. Now, some friendships do have more dramas than others, and that's the case for Elizabeth Taylor and Debbie Reynolds, who started as friends before Reynolds' husband, Eddie Fisher, cheated on her with her best friend, Elizabeth Taylor. But by the time Taylor would precede Reynolds in death, the two were friends yet again. Taylor and Reynolds were icons from the golden age of Hollywood at a time when the movie star was sometimes more important than the movie they starred in. Taylor was a child actress and was well known by the time Debbie Reynolds started acting in her teens. The two first met on the MGM lot where they were both contracted. Reynolds first met Eddie Fisher while she was entertaining troops during the Korean War. The two were America's sweethearts, often photographed together, and sometimes in the company of their friends Elizabeth Taylor and Mike Todd. Just as Taylor and Reynolds were close friends, so were Mike Todd and Eddie Fisher. When Reynolds and Fisher had a son together, they even named him Todd in his honor. Unfortunately, just a month after that joyous day, Mike Todd was in a plane crash. The next few months were a whirlwind for the three. Fisher would begin spending more and more time with Taylor to console her, eventually leaving Reynolds for Taylor. The affair was, understandably, devastating for Reynolds. The entire saga became a well-known Hollywood scandal, and public opinion turned severely against Fisher and Taylor, who were pretty well respected before then. Todd Fisher said of it, quote, Eddie and Elizabeth were vilified. Eddie was declared a philandering, opportunistic loser, and Elizabeth was labeled a bad girl, home-wrecking slut. Debbie, the good girl, the innocent, unsuspecting victim and single mom, was globally embraced with love and sympathy, end quote. It's probably worth noting that while Fisher did leave Reynolds for Taylor, this wasn't the first time that he cheated on her. While the relationship was all smiles for the camera, it was a lot more turbulent behind the scenes. The affair would help the careers of both Reynolds and Taylor, who still had some of their best performances ahead of them. That was not the case for Fisher though, whose prime was in the past as a singer. By this point, he was better known for the women that he had been with. His relationship with Taylor wouldn't last long either. She would leave him for her Cleopatra co-star, Richard Burton. You would think that this would be the end of a relationship between Reynolds and Taylor, but that's not the case. In the grand scheme of their lives, it actually wasn't even that long. In less than a decade, the two were able to rekindle their friendship. Suffice it to say that Reynolds was the bigger person in this situation. She found out that both of them would be on a cruise together in 1966 along with their new respective husbands, and decided to let it be water under the bridge. Reynolds reached out to Taylor, and the two agreed to have dinner, where Taylor apologized for her betrayal. Of the meetup, Reynolds said, quote, I invited Elizabeth and Richard to our suite for cocktails, and I don't think we even mentioned Eddie Fisher more than in passing. We drank champagne and had a lovely time, end quote. After that, they were back to being good friends again and shared many happy times, including starring in a movie together written and directed by Carrie Fisher, the daughter of Debbie Reynolds and Eddie Fisher, even though Taylor's health was in decline by that point. As Taylor's health worsened, Reynolds would often visit her at her home, where the two would watch movies together. When she passed in 2011, Taylor left Reynolds a pair of sapphire earrings and a matching bracelet and necklace. It was a beautiful gesture at the end of a long, well-lived life and a friendship that had endured for more than 40 years. This list could keep going on, and I'm happy to do more in the future, but I think 5 is a good number for now. But there are a lot of friendships that I didn't mention that are just as tight. Here are a few honorable mentions, and their lack of inclusion is in no way indicative that they are any less than the ones prior. First up is Quentin Tarantino and Robert Rodriguez. Both came up in Hollywood around the same time. While Tarantino lived in LA and enmeshed himself in movies, Rodriguez was from Texas and was winning awards for directing at a young age. Both have a strong independent streak, and that helped them rise to the top together during the indie decade of film in the 90s. Both would work together several times, have a similar taste in films, and have kept up their friendship for a long time. Second is Patrick Stewart and Ian McKellen's friendship. This friendship goes back decades to the 1970s when both of them were making names for themselves in the Royal Shakespeare Company. Both came up through the theater, would act opposite each other in X-Men, where I'm sure they could tap into their own friendly rivalry and friendship, and both have remained close well into the first quarter of the new century. Third is Christopher Lee and Peter Cushing. Both of them are legends. Cushing played Grand Moff Tarkin in Star Wars, and was such a charming man that Carrie Fisher had a hard time even pretending to be angry at him for scenes. Lee, meanwhile, was the most interesting man in the world. Played a villain in 3 of the greatest franchises in film history, put out a symphonic metal album, was a spy during World War II, got permission to marry the King of Sweden's daughter, and more. Cushing and Lee, who acted together several times in Hammer horror movies, would go watch Looney Tunes cartoons in theaters, and once even got kicked out for laughing too hard. If that's not friendship, I don't know what is. Fourth, Tina Fey and Amy Poehler. The two met in the 90s while at Chicago's Improv Olympic Theater and would continue to work together at SNL, where Poehler joined after Fey had been writing there for a few years. They'd appeared in several movies together and are perhaps the best hosts that the Golden Globes have ever had. Last but not least are Maisie Williams and Sophie Turner. These two struck up a friendship with each other when both of them appeared on Game of Thrones. Their sisterhood in the series seemed to transfer well into real life. Game of Thrones was a long commitment and was a formative experience for both of them. It would have been difficult not to become friends in this case. Hollywood gets a bad rep, and there's certainly a seedy underbelly like there is for most industries. But it is nice to see that the power of friendship isn't just a trope limited to the movies.